Well, hello, friends. Trisha Goyer here, and I have a very sweet and dear friend with me today, Janet Holm McHenry. We have been friends since like 93, 94, a while, a long time. Janet was one of my first friends in the writing world. I'm sure we're going to have some stories about that here. But first of all, welcome, Janet, and just start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks for having me, friend. This is really a pleasure. Wow. I'm a mom. I have four kids. They're all grown up, done with college, out of the nest, married or almost married,
Yeah.
gainfully employed. So that's a
Good. That's a great thing. Yeah.
that's a great thing. I'm also nana to 10 wonderful grandchildren. I say that I have four pretty good kids with 10 perfect grandchildren.
I love it.
Formerly, I was a journalist, a newspaper reporter, as well as a high school English teacher. So I've been immersed in words for a lot of years.
Yes.
And most of that has happened here in the Sierra Valley in Northern California, where I live. So, I just want to paint the picture a little bit for your listeners. So, imagine Lake Tahoe, except without
Hmm.
the water.
Yes.
We're about an hour north of that area, and it's quite remote. We don't have a single stoplight in our entire county.
Yeah, an adorable little town, adorable little town.
Yeah, we
I love it, and
raised all our kids here, so
that's so good, and then you have how many books do you have now with this new book?
this is my 26th book. Yeah, so again, like a whole variety of like crazy genres, anywhere from children's board books, first chapter books, girls mystery, a cozy mystery, and then a lot of nonfiction,
Uh-huh.
including devotional books, Bible studies, and Christian living. So,
I love it so much, and so we met, like I mentioned, years ago as a baby. I was 22, I think 21 or 22 the first time we met, and her new book is Praying Personalities, Finding Your Natural Prayer Style, and we're gonna get to that in a minute, but we have to talk because, Janet, our real connection, like, we met at Mount Hermon Christian Writers Conference, but our real connection happened over prayer because I met all these wonderful people at Mount Hermon and I went home. Now, this is back in the day before Facebook, before like you can really connect online. I had all these business cards from these wonderful ladies I met, and I was reading through the book, Evelyn Christensen's book, What Happens When Women Pray, and just like about the power of praying together. So I emailed all these ladies like, "Hey, do you want to do like an online prayer thing?" It was decades. I don't even know how many years. Like we were very consistent about it, but everyone would send in their prayer requests every week. I would compile them and we prayed. We got together a few times, but really, I think that really grew all of us into, well, in our Christian walk, it grew us. In our writing ministry, it grew us. In friendships, it grew us. And so that was such a special time, and that all started with prayer.
yeah, absolutely. And it cemented us as one heart friends. And
Hmm.
I think allowed us to do is to step in to to the impossible,
Hmm.
God's possibilities, in terms of how we were praying for our children. We were praying for our
Hmm.
very livelihood. Should I move? This situation has come up with a friend, and it's breaking my heart. And so, I
Hmm.
mean, really, we were gut level praying with and for one another during that time and beyond, because it's still
Yeah.
occurring. We see things on social media, and the natural response then, which is what it's supposed to be, the natural
Hmm.
response is prayer. So yeah.
Absolutely, and I think it gave us the boldness, at least for me, to to just follow my dreams of becoming a writer. When you have all these people like, "Oh, we'll pray about that. Did you send that in? Did you finish that devotional?" There was this natural community that believed that you can do it, which I only have my high school diploma from Weed High School in Northern California. I don't have a degree, I don't have anything, but I had praying friends around me that believed in me, and I think that made a huge difference. And so I love how just prayer centered our relationship and centered our relationship. And then now we're talking about praying personalities, which I love this book so much. I want you to explain it, 'cause then I want to talk about some of these personalities. When I was reading through it, I definitely saw myself in a couple for sure. But let's talk about it. Like, where did you get the idea of praying personalities?
Well, about 25 years ago, I started the practice of prayer walking.
Mhm.
I started doing it because I was physically falling apart, but I also saw it as an opportunity to spend time with God in prayer, which my prayer life was terrible. I mean, it was on the run all the time, with 4 kids and a full-time job and trying to write on the side. So I started prayer walking, and there was a lot of minus in that prayer, my kids, my marriage, my job, and then I saw this young man one morning hand over his little blanketed baby girl to the daycare worker downtown Loyalton here in the Sierra
Yeah.
Valley. And the little girl said, "Bye, Daddy, I love you." And I knew right then that God had me on the streets of my community, less for the minus of my prayers, but more for the needs of others. So that, and it changed me. It changed me physically,
Mhm.
emotionally, spiritually. And so when you experience that kind of change, you become kind of fanatical. You think like everybody should be doing this thing. It's
Yeah.
life changing. But as I spoke about it, I began writing about it and I spoke about it. There would always be, one or two ladies who come up to me afterwards and say, "But Janet, I can't walk. So what
Mhm.
should I do?" So that stuck with me. And a couple years ago, I was doing some speaking about prayer and how to integrate more prayer into our lives as writers. When I sort of heard myself say, perhaps I'd have something to do with our God given personality. And it was like one of those aha moments.
Yeah.
And that just wouldn't leave me. And it kind of began putting pieces together. So, as with all the other books that I write, I went
Mhm.
to God's word and I said, "God, show me. I mean, could this be true that, I might have a different praying practice than someone else and my prayers may sound different than someone else's because of the way you've made me?" And so I began combing the Bible all the way from Genesis to Revelation and looking for specifically how people prayed, how they talked to God, what's the underlying tone that we're seeing there? In what circumstances do they go to God? And all of that put together. And I began to see God's grace and
Mm.
freedom within the pages of his word to accept our conversations with him. Moses argued with God. Gideon negotiated with God.
Yeah.
Job was complaining. He was the most
Mhm.
righteous man on the whole earth, and yet he was complaining, and God
Mhm.
heard those people. God hears our heart, perhaps even when there's not words.
I
So,
love that. The word that stood out to me the most is the freedom.
yeah.
And I think there is freedom within the pages of this book. I had to laugh. There was maybe the intro or some place you talked about feeling like a prayer failure because you had all these journals started with prayer requests. I probably have 20 journals around here. The first page or two has like prayer requests listed, and then they get left, and then they get put on a shelf, and then I'll find it later. And I'm like, oh, I'm such a prayer failure. But as I'm reading, I'm like, there's a couple people I really related with. So I related a lot with Moses, just the conversation back and forth, like all day long. I'll be like, okay, this kid, Lord, you know this kid. Like, I can't go deal with this child in math right now. So I'm like having these conversations with God all day long. Like, Grandma, I'm really tired of my grandma. God, I'm really tired. It's really hard seeing my grandma laying here, so I need you to give me strength. But it's like this ongoing. When we think about, I don't know, when I was little, when I read about prayer without ceasing, I just pictured like these beautiful prayers all day long, just coming, flowing from our lips. But mine is more like Moses, the conversation like these Israelites, these people, like I cannot deal with these people anymore. But those are prayers, like you're communing, you're conversing with God. And that's what I feel like my day is. I'm like, oh, wait, I'm praying, Janet. I'm
That's
praying.
but
Yeah.
that's yeah, but that's it. The underlying objective, whether it's stated or not in the book, is to get people to that place where they do have that
Hmm.
sense of God's presence with them all day long and
Yeah.
not get to the end of the day and think, "Oh yeah, I should pray." But that it's been this sense of God with you.
Hmm.
Emmanuel, God with us all day long.
Yeah, and another one I love David, but I love how he, like, through his songs, he's very just emotional. My kids, I was reading through the Psalms with my teenage. We have 7 adopted kids. 6 of them are girls. We adopted a whole bunch of teenage girls, which has been like a lot of emotion. But we were reading through the Psalms, and they were laughing because David's like, "I am but a worm," and like I just like am in the pit, and they're just like, "Oh my goodness, he's so emotional," and I'm like, this is you guys all the time. Like, you're so emotional, but it made me realize, like, they can be emotional and be emotional with God. So when they start going, like, getting in their drama, I'm like, let's talk to God about that. Take your drama to God. And I'm like, so our phrase now when I'm reminding them they need to pray about it, not just get caught up in the drama, is like, I am but a worm. And they're like, okay, okay, mom, I'll talk to God about it. And they just know. And they call David emo, which is emotional.
Yeah.
They just call him it's emo David. Like, okay, I get it. He's emo. I'm gonna go be emo with God. I'm like, yes. But it helped me with my kids. Like, I can see like they're dramatic, they're teenagers. Not all my teens are dramatic. Most of them are, but they can take that emotion and like David be very emotional. And of course he wrote songs and poetry from it. But it's okay for them to be emotional and be emotional all up in their feels, is what we say with God. And God's gonna be okay with that. And so this is so good for myself. Like, okay, I can see like Moses back and forth, all this conversation all day long, but also see my kids like David with the emo and the emotions and getting all up. And then at the end of every psalm, David's like, but I trust you, God. God, you
Right.
are merciful. Like he would come back around, but it was okay. Like I think it's such a good thing for us to see. It's okay to be feeling all those emotions. God can handle all that. So I told my girls, like, if God can handle David talking about like this, he can handle you talking like that. So go to God with it.
Absolutely. And the thing is, in English teacher language, we would call that change of heart at the end of the psalm or at the end of a poem, the turn. There's an actual
Mm,
turn of emotion or perspective. And that's actually what prayer should do. As
mhm,
because prayer is less about answers and more about access to the living God. And if we are, just turning stuff over to him all day long, we will become more like him. And so we will experience that spiritual turn in our lives where life seems, even though it's still heavy, it seems less heavy because we've turned it over. We've handed it
mhm,
over to God. And we can, just know that God is faithful, God is trustworthy, that we can talk to him, we can hand these things over to him, we can just vent even,
mhm.
as Moses, as David did, many others in the Bible, and know that God is doing a work also in us, not in that situation or with those teenagers, but he's doing that work in us.
Yeah, and I think it's really helpful because we can also summarize like, oh, the saints in the Bible and all these godly men and women. Well, of course, the more we read through the Bible, we realize like they are so far from being perfect. Like so many mistakes, but also even their saint label, their prayers life are completely different. The way they approach God is completely different. And it just makes me realize like God created all these personalities. Like he needed Jeremiah to be the weeping prophet and to be able to express God's emotions of sorrow with the people. He needed
Mhm.
different people in the Bible. He needed Daniel to be faithful and to have this whole society that's in exile see him at his window 3 times a day. He needed that for that person for that time in
Yep.
history. He needed all our personalities. He needs us for this time in history to reach different people. It's not all the same. It's not like, oh, all Christians are the same. All saints of God in the Bible are the same. No, he needs different people and different personalities at different times. And it's like, oh, so I mean, it's talking about prayer, but I think reading through your book also helped me just to see how God just creates all these different personalities for a purpose for that time in history. And we can be okay with different personalities in the world around us, in the Christian society around us, because God has a plan for that and a design for that.
And we can also recognize that within our families,
Mhm.
in our relationship with our spouse, with our families, with our friendship circles. And we're not all going to pray alike. We're not
Yeah.
all alike in personality. And so even when we have those introverted children, for example, if we say, okay, Susie, I want you to pray for dinner now. Let's pray. That's going to be hard for her. But if
Mhm.
we can kind of cue her, and maybe while we're fixing dinner, hey, honey, would you say the prayer tonight? That's just going to be much more of a comfort level for her, because she can,
Mhm.
because she's going public in front of
Yeah.
the family. It's different. And so, so many people tell me like, oh, I just feel so awkward praying, in a group, and like, oh yes, you introverted sweet thing.
Yeah. It's okay. It's
It's
okay.
okay. It's okay. Yeah.
I
But
love that. Okay, let's talk
yeah.
about Jesus. So we
Okay.
have all these personalities. What about Jesus? Like, did he have a personality? How did that work?
Yeah, he actually is has the perfect personality. We see him, that he needs to get away. He needs to get up and be with his father alone, but he also, prayed in large settings. He invited people. They flocked to him, but he didn't turn them away. So
Mhm.
we see that side of him, introverted, extroverted. We see, him responding emotionally in situations. We see him responding rationally in situations. So he is definitely, has the perfect personality. And so we're going to see um, so many different ways that he prays, so many different kinds of prayers that he prays,
Mhm.
and it's all out of his natural, the natural God on earth kind of person who he was. So, and is today. So, and he still is interceding. That he
Mhm.
still is interceding
Yes.
for us. Hebrews tells us. So that's super exciting. And I think ultimately, if we want to like sort of, if we were had the objective to design our praying personality, we would study the life of Christ.
Mhm.
So, yeah, there's a chapter on that. I've also written a book about that.
Yes. Yeah, I wanted you this is a lead in, Janet, for you to mention your book on that.
Yeah. But yeah, I love studying Jesus. I call him my prayer mentor or my personal trainer.
Yeah.
I picture him waiting on the front steps of my house and, come on, Janet, behold, I stand at the door, I'm knocking. Let's go
Yes.
prayer walking. And I do believe that studying his life has given me insight to wherever I am, there's a need for prayer. Wherever Jesus went, things drastically changed, because of it, because of where he went. So that's why I get crazy about advocating for prayer walking, because I feel like
Yeah.
it can have effect on our communities. So
Yep. So Prayer Walking is one of your books. It's just called Prayer Walking. And what's the subtitle on Prayer Walking?
prayer walk,
Um,
have
Prayer Walk.
becoming a woman of prayer, strength, and discipline. Yeah,
Okay. And then what's the name? All the prayers of Jesus, or what's the
it's
title?
the complete guide to the prayers of Jesus.
That's what
So
it is.
everything about his prayers, what he taught about prayer, his praying life, and how he still prays for us today.
I love it. So one other fun thing that you do in the book is there's different personality tests and personality enneagrams and all the different things that people have figured out. So you take these and you use them, but then you apply them to prayer. So how did you go about that? And then did you discover as you're realizing there's different there's different types of tests, but basically they're just picking out different things in people. So what did you
Yeah.
discover about prayer in that?
Well, I examined 8 different personality theories, and I think it really is
Mhm.
important to keep in mind that these are man-created personality theories, that we can recognize that the best way to understand ourselves individually is to study God's word and let it to speak truth into our lives. But these can be really helpful for us to create awareness of our strengths and our weaknesses. And I look at 8 different ones of those, the
Mhm.
most popular ones that I could I felt were ones that people were familiar with, anywhere from the Greek temperaments all the way up through many of the modern ones, including the Enneagram. And so, what I did, bottom line, was instead of saying, "Hey, go take this test," or I tried to examine the underlying questions, or what I felt were the underlying questions for each of those, because I feel like sometimes when we take those tests,
Mhm.
we're not really getting the correct answer, because maybe we don't always see ourselves in the correct light. We may
Mhm.
think less of ourselves or more of ourselves, or we may be striving for what we think is the best answer when any answer is the correct answer.
Yeah.
So I tried to look at the underlying questions to help the reader, kind of ponder some of that, think about herself or himself, and then offer hundreds of prayer pointers in the book.
Mhm.
If this resonates with you, if this kind of personality resonates with you, if you think you're this or that, then, consider these particular sort of praying practices. Try them out, see if that is a really kind of a natural groove for you, and then live into that.
Yeah. And again, it's just seeing these things as tools, and sometimes we like these personality tests. They really seem to fit with us, and then we could say, "Okay, so what tips might there be for praying?" And just help us to see, like, we could just take glean different things off of different ones. Like, we don't have to say, I am an INFJ, and this is how I'm gonna pray," and all these different things. We can figure out, "Oh, I really like this tip. I don't know what that label means, but I really like this tip. It seems like it would fit well with something that I would be able to do."
Right, right. So I think sometimes the reader might find like, oh yeah, those ideas that really
Mhm.
connects with me, whether or not they click into a certain particular kind of a personality box. And it's never my intention to kind of put people in boxes. I think God create each of us uniquely. We're going to be a combo of different kinds of personalities from one test to another. And that's the underlying thing is, again, grace and freedom. Let's find grace and
Yeah,
freedom to pray in the way that God has created each of us.
I love that. So what did you discover about yourself? You've been talking about prayer, you've been writing about prayer for a really long time. Was there some part of discovery in this too?
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, I came face to face with the idea that I'm a problem solver, and that's one of the
Mhm.
four praying personalities that I offer up to the reader by the end of the book. That that I see a problem. My natural instinct might be to just try to fix it. Oh, there's a problem. I can take care of that. But what God wants me to do is to give it to Him first, because then He's going to give me insight about then how to next, find next steps there. So the problem solver goes to God because she or he sees God as someone who can solve problems.
Mhm.
Situation with your kids arise. You mentioned that earlier. That then you go to God to prayer, and it's a mental switch for someone with my kind of personality, but that's a piece of growth. That's a piece of spiritual growth that is so necessary, I think, for each of us to understand kind of who we are, what our natural tendencies are, strengths, weaknesses, and then kind of to live into those strengths, and see God as a point of access throughout our whole day. Isn't that's a crazy privilege, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an amazing privilege that the God of the universe is listening and attuned to what we're saying and our needs and our concerns and wants to hear from us and wants to be there with us and then wants us to offer other people up to him like, hey, my friend's really going through this hard time, and just have that access to the throne of God. And it's just amazing. And when I was reading, I think it was in the intro, you're talking about just you're a fixer. You see problems. You usually end up leading stuff. That is so me. I'm like, oh my gosh. Now I know why Janet's my friend. We're so much the same personality. And I have a really hard time when I'm in a group and a Bible study or anything. And I'm like, they could just do this differently. We could just because and I'll have to like stop myself from, okay, why don't we group up right now? And then I just want to fix it, solve it, and I'll just have to sit there. Sometimes God will call me to lead in some areas, but sometimes I just have to sit there and let other people lead, and that's really hard because I just want to. I just want to. I think I have a way that would work. My kids are going on a missions trip to New York for spring break that I'm not going on because I'm speaking in California. You'll be there at Mount Herman. Otherwise, I'd be wanting to go, and I'm like, we could do this together, and we could do this for fundraising, and we could get together and pray for the kids. And the youth leader's leading it. He's like, well, we have 2 meetings set up, and that's what we're gonna do. I'm like, okay, that's all we're gonna do. Like, I just have to keep pulling
Yeah,
myself back.
yeah.
It's their mission trip. That's what they're doing. They're gonna plan. can help if they need me to, but it's so funny when we're that type of personality that
Mhm.
needs to step back and let other people do things differently, pray in a different way, go to God in a different way. Yeah, it's fun and a challenge at the same
It's a
time.
challenge because I think, you and I, we see our day as kind of a list. It's a to-do list. And we get
Mhm.
this almost this high from checking those things off. That's done.
Mhm.
That's done. And at the end of the day, if everything's done, we're like, oh, now I can have peace. So I
Mhm.
think all of us here probably have some sort of to-do list. But I recently was beginning to think, well, what if we had a to-be list? And my
Mm.
to-be list was to be with Jesus first thing when I wake up, to be with
Mm.
him in the new time, to be with him in the afternoon and into the evening, and so I have a sense of his presence all day long. That's my new to-be list.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much, and I think God maybe that's what he's been teaching me because as I'm, like, caring for grandma, it takes me 45 minutes to an hour to feed her. Like, I can't do any I can't. I've tried to, like, answer text messages with one hand while I'm trying to feed nope, I just have to be in the moment, be with grandma, be feeding grandma, like and sometimes I think the doers he does have to kind of pull us back so we can just be and just use
Yeah.
that time for God. I end up in physical therapy this morning because caring for grandma, physically moving her, changing her, all the things, my back was just getting messed up. And for an hour, I was in physical therapy. Probably half that time, I was getting heat on my back, different things. And I was laying there with my eyes closed. It was a great prayer time. I'm like, oh, good. I'm talking with Janet later today and I have all this unexpected prayer time. But I think for some of us that do really well at doing that, there's these moments come up where we just, if we're not being enough, just taking that time enough, God will slow us down in different ways. And this morning, I had a wonderful prayer time, praying for this podcast, praying for different things in my day, praying for my kids as I was laying there, getting my back worked
Yeah.
on
Getting
from doing.
PT. Yeah. Yeah.
So good. Well,
So
Janet,
yeah.
I just love this book so much. I loved it from the first time I heard about it. And then when I was able to read the galley, I loved it. And I just think it's going to be such a blessing. What kind of feedback? Have you already got comments from people that are just starting to get into the book and read it for the first time?
I hate to say it out loud almost, but I've not heard a critical word yet, and there
Yeah.
seems to be just a kind of a swell of
Hmm.
enthusiasm for it, and really the grace and freedom that it can offer each of us.
Yes.
And that's kind of what I always would hope my ministry would
Hmm.
do. We do find grace and freedom as we are, consistently going to God in prayer, studying His Word, and having him speak that truth into our lives. That lends a lot of freedom there to us as believers, and women and men of faith who simply want to you know be stronger, grow in maturity, as the years pass. So
This would be a great book for groups, for Bible studies. They can read through it together. And I'm sure, like, just as you and I have had conversations about our personalities and how we see God, how we've approached God, how God has grown us spiritually. I mean, there could be so many rich conversations for groups that go through this book together. So, highly recommended. So, for those interested in getting a book for themselves, or getting a book for their Bible study or their group, where can they go to get more information about praying personalities?
well, it's on all the online bookstores, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, christianbook.com, and it should be in your local Christian bookstore, if not Barnes and Noble, very soon. So excited about
Yeah.
that.
Well,
Super
thank you,
excited.
Janet. Thank you,
Mhm.
Janet, for being here today.
Thank you, Trisha.
And
Always a
then one last
pleasure.
thing, where can people connect with you online?
Ah, janetmchenry.com. And I'm all over social media, so you can find me there as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, friend.
Thank you.